I love to tell the story for those who know it best, seem hungering and thirsting to hear it like the rest. And when in scenes of glory I sing the new song, 'twill be the old story that I have loved so long. I love to tell the story, 'twill be my theme in glory, to tell the old story of Jesus and His love.
This morning I want to start with a story. It's more of a personal story, I guess, but I think many of you can relate to it. When I was growing up in southern Indiana, we lived out in the country about 15 miles outside Evansville on a few acres of land. And of course we had animals and dogs. I'm sure many of you have had some dogs at some time in your life and maybe still do. When I was a child growing up, every day during school, you can count on the dogs going to the corner of our property, sitting and looking. We are on top of a hill. They look down the road and wait for the school bus, waiting for the master, just waiting for the master. And as soon as they could see the school bus coming, they would run to the end of the driveway to greet us as we came off the bus. And they didn't care what we would do, whether we would go chasing rabbits, or I could hit a baseball and they'd go grab it and bring it back to me, or we just sit down and talk. None of that mattered to them. They just wanted to be there, but they were ready to serve. And as I looked at this lesson today, I thought back to that. And I thought, what a shame that we can't be as dedicated to waiting for the master and ready to serve as our dogs have been to us. Well, the questions this morning, and this lesson is a harder lesson in some ways. I mean, it's not difficult to understand, but it's kind of hard to deal with. But first of all, how is it that we are going to stand face to face with Jesus? I mean, there's going to come that time when you will stand face to face with Him. So how do we get there? What happens so that we will, in fact, stand before Him?
Either by death or the second coming.
So we have two possibilities. One, we will die, and we will meet Him, stand before Him, face to face. Or there will be that time when He comes and He calls His own to meet Him in the air. What difference does it make whether we see Him face to face by our death or through rapture?
As far as the ultimate outcome, really nothing.
Sometimes we tend to think of it somehow as different, or we behave as though it's something different. But as a matter of fact, it's the same thing, isn't it? We accomplish that same thing. We're going to stand before Him.
Well, there's going to be a time when we're all glorified at one time. We're not
right.
glorified when we die.
Right. Yeah, and so there's a physical thing in the body, the glorification of the body. That's right. But the bottom line is we are with Him, aren't we? And that's the most important thing, isn't it? So we'll keep that in mind as we look at our lesson this morning. So when is a person ready to meet Jesus face to face? Let's suppose your best friend is dying. Your best friend is dying, and you're standing at the bedside of your best friend while your best friend is dying. And your best friend says to you, "I'm not sure I'm ready." What do you say to your best friend?
Well, you were going to say, what would be your response to your friend? Well, you could say, "Well, I'm glad you brought that up. I'm glad you asked that question."
Okay. And where would you take him from there?
Then you take him to just explaining the very gospel.
Okay. So you're making sure that there's that understanding of the gospel. Okay. We might not admit to it, but we probably have all been in situations, maybe not quite that strong, but we've been in situations where we've had that opportunity to say something significant to somebody at a critical time in their life, and we passed, and we shouldn't have. So how can someone prepare for meeting Jesus?
There's people back in the 1800s that put on some kind of gowns or sheets, and then they went up on top of a mountain thinking that Jesus was.
That kind of thing goes on even today, doesn't it? Where people are predicting that, the time Jesus is going to return is this date. And so we'll all get ready and we'll sell our stuff and we'll go stand somewhere together and be raptured together at that moment. In our lifetimes, we've seen it several times where somebody has made this big prediction and then it's on the news. And
sometimes I'll actually commit suicide like that in a hill box. People follow Jim Jones out there going to meet Jesus.
Drink the Kool-Aid. Mm-hmm. So how does someone prepare?
Gerald, as we said before, to trust in Christ as your Lord and Savior and then live the life and be ready.
Jesus said something about just keep doing, the good things that you're supposed to be doing.
We'll have a lot more to say about these as we go through the lesson today. What keeps people from being as prepared as they should be? Well, he says they don't think they're going to die. Well, I don't know if anybody really thinks that, but not today. That's right. Plenty of time. There's plenty of time. Plenty of time. With respect to the rapture, the calling up of the body, how long has that been told this is going to happen? And so people look at that and say, well, it hasn't happened in 2,000 years. How likely is it it's going to happen tomorrow?
That's what the scoffers in 2 Peter said, where's the promise of its coming?
Where is it? And with respect to death, you're right. I'm not going to die today. I'm invincible. Bulletproof, yeah. That's the way many people feel about their life, isn't it? Death is something, it's going to happen to me down there. Although we have some things that bring us back to that realization. Since we can't envision or don't want to think about the possibility of our death in the near future, what do? We give little or no thought to it. We give little or no thought to Jesus coming back and calling us. And when we don't think about those things, what do we think about? Everybody's different, but what are the kinds of things we think about? What's pleasing and exciting to me? That's the tendency. I'm not saying that you as an individual, but the tendency of a person, when they don't give any thought to these other things, is to look at the happier things, the things that are fun, pleasant, enjoyable. And so we enjoy ourselves. And we become blind to this other possibility. So how can we help a person prepare? Now, I put this picture up here just to make sure that we all know that that's not the way. We're not going to carry anybody on our backs to heaven. No matter how much we may want to, no matter how much we may try, we're not carrying anybody. Each and every one will go on his own. But how is it that we can help somebody prepare?
Witnessing by word and action, word and deed.
So that just by showing them in the way that we live, what else?
This is a person that is a Christian or a non-Christian.
Let's say it's either somebody who is not or somebody who's not really sure if they are. Well, in fact, they may be sure, but maybe they aren't. Is that possible? That there might be somebody who is, hey, I'm a Christian, but maybe isn't a Christian?
You have to get to know that person so you can ask them personal questions.
Yeah, it helps to know the person, doesn't it? So that you can get down. That's the challenge in general of discussing the faith with anybody, is that you have to know something about the person so that you can identify with where they are and address them appropriately. When the time comes for someone to meet Jesus, they're at that moment of death. How can you help? All right, so there you have an example of somebody who was a Christian, didn't know Jesus already. But let's say that that's not the case of the person. You have somebody who is not a believer at all, or somebody who thinks that they're a believer, but maybe they're not. At that moment of death, what are you going to be able to say or do? I'm talking now at that moment. And I'm going to answer the question. If you can't do anything, it's too late. There comes a time when it's too late. And what's the consequence?
They fall on the wrong side of the chasm.
Or down in it. We just need to remember to keep in mind that this is a serious thing that we're talking about. It is a very serious matter. The film clip that I have for you this morning is from MASH. The show, Mobile Army Surgical Hospital, MASH, the unit set up and this is in the Korean War. The show was on through most of the 70s and into the early 80s. And this comes from season 10, episode 17. The major character in the scene is Hawkeye Pierce. It's all about what he's going to be doing here, but it involves his best friend, B.J. Honeycutt. And there'll be a couple of the other players in there as well in the parts that I'm going to show you. I'm going to show you some pieces of the first part of the show and then the end of the show. And it relates to what we're looking at here today.
Honeycutt back from Seoul yet? I just didn't have the heart to say no.
What's up?
Just got word from my corps. Battalion A needs a surgeon on the double. And as I recall, it's Honeycutt's turn.
That certainly isn't mine. I made that miserable sojourn last time. 3 days and 2 nights nestled in the bosom of Porkchop Hill.
These are hard times. You nestle anywhere you can.
Well, seems you just drew the short straw, Pierce.
Oh, come.
Pressure bandages, sir.
Yeah, good, thanks. How long you been working alone?
It's last night.
Where's your other surgeon?
He was killed.
Oh, God, what happened?
Mortar. Right out there where you parked your Jeep.
If you want to go sack out for a while, I'll watch things out here. Come on.
Thanks.
Benjamin Franklin Pierce, being of sound mind and endangered body, hereby decree this to be my last will and testament.
The new surgeon's on his way. We'll be okay till he gets here. Why don't you head on back?
Right. Thanks.
Well, Pierce, it was fun while it lasted.
Yeah, I'm just getting used to having a ceiling under my feet.
Did you finish your will?
All except for my best friend. How did you know it was my will?
I've seen a lot of those written here.
This concludes my last will and testament. Benjamin Franklin Pierce.
Captain, you really are alive.
Nah, it's just a vicious rumor.
What are you doing?
Catching up on some overdue paperwork.
Get some sleep. There's one thing I learned about being company clerk. There's no paperwork that can't wait until tomorrow.
I used to think that too.
So he changed his mind about tomorrow. And we all do that. Why was he suddenly interested in writing a will? He could see death, couldn't he? Death was staring him in the face. And that's one of the values of funerals for many of us. To attend somebody else's funeral, not your own. But it is that reminder of our mortality, isn't it? Any of you ever think like that when you attend a funeral? I mean, that's a reminder to me always of my mortality and reminds me that my days are numbered as well. But it's in times like that, whether we have some critical situation in our lives where we realize that, hey, I could die here, or we attend a funeral and we start to think about this. We don't often think about death. We don't often think about Jesus coming back, most of us. How does this preparing a will relate to preparing to meet Jesus face to face? It's not the same thing, but I see a relationship here, and that's why I played the clip. If we're preparing a will, then we're showing that we're concerned about the situation. We realize that we are going to leave this world, and we realize we're going to be leaving behind people that we love. And so by preparing a will, we're preparing for that future, aren't we? The issue here is entering heaven. The alternative is not a pretty one, is it? I mean, it's one or the other, and this is the one we want, so let's talk about entering into heaven. That's our issue. I want to go back, first of all, to the Sermon on the Mount. In the Sermon on the Mount, Matthew chapters 5, 6, and 7, in the beginning you have those Beatitudes, happy is the man who is, blessed is the man who... You thought the law was hard, don't kill, don't do this, don't do that. He said, but I say to you, and then he has all these other things that he adds on that makes it much harder than the law to fulfill. How do you do all those things? The Sermon on the Mount's always been important to me. That's where he really got my attention for the first time. But when I read through the Sermon on the Mount, he knocked me to the floor. Because when you read it, you realize I can't do that. You look at one little line in there, be ye perfect as he is perfect. How's that? Can you do that one? The whole thing is like that, really. I couldn't do that. So we need some help. You have all this going on in there, but how does he end it? He ends it in chapter 7, and he comes to this statement that he makes in verses 21 to 23. First of all, verse 21. Not everyone who says to me, Lord, Lord, will enter the kingdom of heaven. Wait a minute. Now, we understand that those who don't call him Lord, those who refuse him, we know what's going to happen to them. They're over here on the left-hand side, and they're going to the other place. They're not going to heaven. But now he's saying that all of those people are calling Lord, Lord, and everybody in church throughout the country today and throughout the world today, everybody in church is calling him Lord. But he says of those people over here who are all calling me Lord, not all those are going to heaven. And we don't like to think about that. But the one who does the will of my Father who is in heaven, does the will, does those things that he's supposed to do. We'll talk about that some more too. But then he adds in verse 22, on that day, people are going to say, but Lord, look at all these wonderful things I've done for you in your name. So all those people are saying, Lord, 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 they're calling him, I have this close relationship with you and I've done these things for you. What does he say? I will declare to them, I never knew you. Depart from me, you men of iniquity, you men of lawlessness, you men of sin. Depart from me, I never knew you. So many who are calling him Lord, Lord are not going to enter the kingdom of heaven, even though they're going to say, well, look at all this stuff I've done in your name. And he says, nope, other place. I never knew you. Depart from me. Well, this is really serious now, isn't it? This whole issue of preparing to meet him face to face. There are a lot of people, what he's saying is there are a lot of people who are convinced today that they're going to meet him face to face, and they are going to see him as judge, and he's going to send them not to the place that they're expecting to go, but they're going to the other place. This is a hard lesson because this is not the kind of feel-good stuff that you like to hear. But now we're going to look at the story that illustrates it pretty clearly, and that's the parable of the 10 virgins. Matthew chapter 25. So let's look at the parable, and we'll go through it pretty carefully. He starts it with, the kingdom of heaven is like. And he does this in lots of places, doesn't he? The kingdom of heaven is like this. Kingdom of heaven is like this. Not in none of those is he saying, this is a perfect description of everything that you need to know about the kingdom of heaven. He's giving some insight into the kingdom of heaven by these illustrations, and they're different aspects of the kingdom of heaven. But he says here that the kingdom of heaven is like 10 virgins. Now that's a little strange, but he's going to tell us something about the kingdom of heaven by this story of these 10 virgins. And he says that of these 10 virgins, they were going to meet the bridegroom and they took their lamps with them. So let's step back and think about that. What does that mean? They're going to meet the bridegroom, which means that they have been invited to the wedding feast. They have been invited to the wedding feast. They're taking the lamps, which means that they are participants in this. They have a role to play. They have a job to do in this wedding feast, in the preparation for this feast. So you have 10 virgins, bridesmaids they're called in some versions, but in the ESV it's virgins, who took their lamps. So they have their lamps and they're going to meet the bridegroom. They're getting ready to participate in this marriage feast. Now he says of those 10 virgins that 5 of them were foolish and 5 were wise. I don't believe that he's implying that half the people in the church are one way and half the people in the church are the other way. I don't know what the percentage is. He knows. 5 of them wise, 5 foolish. Now he explains the difference between the two. He says of the foolish took their lamps, but they didn't take any extra oil. So they have what the lamp will hold in their small lamps, but they have the oil in the lamp to provide the light for that period of time that the lamp will burn. And he's calling those foolish. The wise not only take their lamps, but they also take a flask of oil, recognizing that they may need some more. This may go on a little bit longer than they anticipated, and so they're preparing. And he's describing the difference between the two as wise and foolish. And we're going to see in a little bit more detail as to why he does that. As the bridegroom was delayed, from what I understand of the Jewish weddings time of Jesus, the bridegroom would, the day that he was going to go get his bride, they would be betrothed, they could reach the deal, they're going to get married, and then he would have to build a room on the house or build a house or something for them to live in. And once that was all done, then he would go back and negotiate the final deal with the father to get the bride. Then he'd go get the bride and they would be married. The virgins are going to join the bridegroom, so they know this is imminent now. The house is finished, and so they're ready to move. And so the bridegroom has gone to negotiate with the father of the bride the final price of the bride. It was a good sign in those days for the bridegroom not to be able to get there until well after dark, because that meant that the father and the groom were negotiating the price, and it showed that the value of the bride was higher if it took longer to negotiate the price. So it was always a good thing in the eyes of people that the bridegroom came late, because that meant, this is a very valuable relationship. The other thing we'll notice is that the story is focused entirely upon the bridegroom. Quite different from the way it works in our culture today. You have a wedding today, people hardly notice that there's a groom there. It's about the bride, right? It's all about the bride. But at this time, it was the bridegroom. So the bridegroom was delayed. The bridesmaids, the virgins, are really there to serve the bride, to help her in preparing. But what they're going to do is, when the bridegroom comes, they're going to take the bride out to meet the bridegroom, and then they're going to join the wedding party, and they're all going to go to the marriage feast. The bridegroom has his entourage around him, and so they've finished the negotiations, and they're going to come with their lanterns lit, and they're going to come to get the bride and then go to the marriage feast. The virgins are with the bride, and they're going to bring her out to meet this party, and then they're all going to go together with their lamps lit. And the more people you have, or the more lights you have, the brighter the picture, everything. It's a more glorious wedding procession if you have a lot of people with their lamps shining brightly. He's delayed, and so the natural thing is that they all become drowsy and sleep. Perfectly natural. Now, sometimes people look at that and say, well, how lazy of them to fall asleep. But if you've been up all day, how long can you go to fall asleep when you're tired? That's not unusual. Calvin points out, he thinks that this is really pointing to our activities in the world. Given the delay of Jesus coming, if we were to focus entirely upon the coming of Jesus 24 hours a day, how long would you last before you fell asleep? There are things that we must do in the world, and so that's fine. He said, yes, we're going to have those, and we must do those. We're going to have things that we enjoy in the world. And there's nothing wrong with things that we enjoy in the world. But we can't let them distract us from the main thing. They become drowsy and they sleep, and that's not a big deal. Then finally, at midnight, somebody's running ahead and saying, he's coming, he's coming. That is an alert to the virgins to make sure they're awake, have the bride ready so that she can get out there and meet the party, and they can proceed to the wedding feast, and everybody can celebrate. So here's the bridegroom come out to meet him. So they receive that message. They jump up, they trim their lamps, make sure that they're ready for the party, because it's about providing the light to glorify the bridegroom and the bride for this party to have the feast. Problem is, the foolish ones see that their lamps are just about out of oil because they've been burning. So the foolish said to the wise, give us some of yours. We need a redistribution of wealth. That'll fix it. That's what we need. The foolish did not have enough oil to fulfill the job that had been assigned to them, join the party, provide this light to help glorify the bridegroom, and they didn't have it. When the time came, they were not prepared. The wise answered them back, saying, yeah, we can do that, but if we do, then we're all going to run out of oil before we get to the marriage feast. There's not enough for all of us. And that's going to be twice as bad, because then you have no lights, so you can't do it. It's too late. What we were talking about earlier, there comes a point in time where it's too late to help those who have not prepared. So they give them advice, go to the oil merchants and buy some for yourselves. Well, good luck with that after midnight. But anyway, they go to get some oil. So while they were going to buy their oil, the bridegroom came. And those who were ready went with him with their lamps to light the way. And they entered into the marriage feast. That's our goal, is to enter into the marriage supper of the Lamb. And the 5 do. They enter into the marriage feast. And the door was shut. The door was shut. The 5 that were in with the rest of the party were securely inside. Everything's fine. And the 5 are outside with the door closed. They do what you would expect. Those 5 come and they pound on the door and say, Master, Lord, Lord, please let us in. Now, these are good girls. They care about the bride and the groom. They were invited to the wedding feast. They were happy to accept that invitation. They were assigned a task to fulfill. They were happy to accept the task. They just didn't fulfill it. They were not prepared to fulfill the task that had been given to them. So they pounded on the door, Lord, Lord, open to us. Here are the good things that we've done for you. The only thing that we could fault them from the story, the only thing we see, they just were not prepared. So maybe he'll open the door and let them in. But he answered, Truly, truly, I say to you, I do not know you. I never knew you. Depart from me, you workers of iniquity. Now that's pretty harsh, isn't it? These good kids, happy for the bride and groom, happy to have been invited, happy to go, they weren't prepared. Then Jesus adds in verse 13, just to let us know that this is about his coming. This story is about his coming back. So there's no confusion about what the parable is about. It's about his return. He says, Watch therefore, for you know neither the day nor the hour. Watch and be ready. Be prepared. Luke tells in chapter 12 something similar, not this story, but a different story, about the master returning home and his servants being ready for his return. And he says in verse 40, You must also be ready for the master's return. For the Son of Man is coming at an hour you do not expect. Is it important to be ready? It's a matter of one or another. We've all been invited to the marriage supper of the Lamb. The date has not been announced. We don't know when it is. We don't know the day of our death. We don't know the day of his return. Those things are uncertain to us, but that should not affect our behavior. It would, though, wouldn't it? Because if we knew that we were going to die tomorrow at noon, or if we knew that Jesus was going to return tomorrow at noon, how would the next 24 hours in your life change? Now, I'm going to remind you of 2 verses that are important about being ready and being prepared. In Ephesians, Paul writes that you have been created for good works, that he created before you were born. He created beforehand these good works for you to do. So there are good works, and they're different for each of us. I don't know what yours are. I have a hard time understanding sometimes what mine are. But you have been created for good works. He has created you, and he has created these things for you to do. How right is it for you to not do the things that he created for you to do and the reason why he created you? That should be fairly serious, shouldn't it? We have been created for good works. Then in Matthew chapter 5, in the Sermon on the Mount, he says, Let your light so shine before men that they may see your good works and give glory to the Father. So we're to do those good works, and those good works and the performance of those good works is our lamp. We're providing light. We're showing the glory of the Father, the light that we provide through this procession that we're in of life. Now, the distractions are going to be there. We live life. There are things going on in our lives that are natural. We have to work to earn food to put on the table. We do all these things. That's natural. And we're going to have times to enjoy certain things, certain pleasures in life. And he wants us to have those pleasures. But we have to be careful that they don't take away from what's number one. And we have to remember then that the unprepared are refused entrance into the kingdom. Depart from me, I never knew you. you workers of iniquity, those of you who are not doing the will of the Father. His will for you is to do what He's asked you to do, to perform the task that you've been assigned in this procession of life. Many will be surprised because there are a lot of people who are convinced that they're good and their situation is not that good.
I love to tell the story. 'Twill be my theme in glory to tell the old story of Jesus and His love.